I never thought it would come to this, but life has a way of forcing you to make tough choices. My family had always been tight-knit, or at least that's what I believed for most of my life. Growing up, I always looked up to my parents. They were my role models, the people who I thought would have my back no matter what. But as I got older, I began to notice the cracks in our relationship, the subtle but painful signs that things weren't as perfect as they seemed. I remember the first time I started feeling like an outsider. My sister, Sarah, had always been the golden child. She was the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. I mean, don't get me wrong, she was talented and smart, but the way they fawned over her always left me feeling a little invisible. But I let it slide. After all, I didn't want to rock the boat. Still, something inside me started to change as I grew older, as I started seeing how much more attention and support Sarah received. It wasn't just the praise, it was the financial backing, the opportunities they gave her that they never even considered offering to me. Then, things took a darker turn when my parents made a decision that would alter the course of our lives forever. They decided to give all their savings, their investments, everything they had worked for over the years, to Sarah. They didn't even hesitate. It wasn't a loan, no strings attached, just a gift, no questions asked. I was shocked, confused, hurt, but I didn't say anything at first. I kept quiet, telling myself that maybe they knew what they were doing, that maybe Sarah needed it more than I did. But as the months went by, and I watched her squander their generosity without any consequences, the feeling of betrayal grew heavier. They never once even considered giving me a fraction of what they had handed over to her. It wasn't just the money, it was everything. The house, the family heirlooms, the future they promised me but had never actually offered. The last straw came when I overheard a conversation between my mom and dad, talking about how they had set up a trust fund for Sarah's future and how they were planning to buy her a house. But that wasn't all. They casually mentioned that they had nothing left for me and that my future was on me. They had written me off without a second thought. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just disappointed, I was furious. They had chosen her over and over again without ever once thinking about the toll it would take on me. But what hurt the most wasn't that they gave her everything. It was that they never once thought I was worth fighting for. And that's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was done playing their game. If they weren't going to give me a chance, then I would create my own path. I was going to build my own fortune. But I wasn't going to do it alone. I was going to make sure they saw me succeed, while they had nothing left to hold on to. The moment I made that decision, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just a victim of their favoritism anymore. I was a force to be reckoned with. I always considered myself the more practical one. While Sarah excelled in academics and had an innate charm that made everyone adore her, I was the steady one. I didn't crave the spotlight, but I worked hard, and I always had a clear idea of what I wanted in life. My parents were proud of Sarah's achievements, and I was proud of her too, but there was always this nagging feeling that they expected more from me, even though I was giving my all. I remember my high school years well. I wasn't the favorite, but I was never ignored either. I got decent grades, played sports, and tried my best to live up to their expectations. But no matter how much I did, it always felt like Sarah was the one who got the bigger piece of the pie. Whether it was a scholarship offer or a job opportunity, it seemed like every path I was on was overshadowed by her accomplishments. It was when I went off to college that I started noticing the imbalance more clearly. Sarah didn't just have their emotional support, she had their financial backing too. I had to work multiple jobs to make ends meet, while Sarah was given a credit card with no limit and a promise that they would cover her tuition. Of course, she didn't ask for it. She never had to. My parents just assumed that was what they should do for her. But I didn't mind at first. I didn't want to feel like a charity case, and I had always prided myself on being independent. I worked hard, took out loans, and made it work. What hurt, though, was the way my parents would act like it was just normal for me to struggle while they made sure Sarah had everything handed to her. It wasn't just the material things either. It was the way they treated her. They would brag about her to their friends, her perfect grades, her scholarships, her social life. Every time they praised her, I felt like I was invisible. They never acknowledged my hard work or my accomplishments. It was as though I was simply supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps they threw my way. Still, I told myself that it was okay. After all, they were my parents, and they had their reasons. Maybe I wasn't the one they needed to invest in. Maybe they saw something in Sarah that they didn't see in me. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being left behind. It was a slow burn, this feeling of being neglected, and I couldn't shake the growing resentment that came with it. Then, things started to shift after college. I began to realize just how much I had been doing on my own. I had no safety net, no trust fund waiting for me, no one to rely on but myself. And despite the odds, I was starting to build something. It wasn't easy, but I was making it happen. But the turning point came when I discovered something that would shake me to my core. I had always assumed that once I was out of school, my parents would offer me the same kind of help they had given Sarah. But when I brought it up to them, their response was cold, dismissive even. They told me that I was on my own now and that I needed to figure things out for myself, just like Sarah had. That was when I knew I was never going to get the help I needed. They had already made up their minds. They had given everything to Sarah, and there was nothing left for me. At that moment, I realized how deep the favoritism ran. It wasn't just about money or opportunities. It was about a pattern of neglect that had been building for years. I had always been the afterthought, the one who was expected to just get by on my own. And I wasn't okay with it anymore. I wasn't going to beg for their help. I wasn't going to wait for them to finally see me. If they wouldn't offer me a chance, I was going to make my own. I wasn't going to let them continue to treat me like I wasn't worth anything. And that's when I decided that I would never let this go. I would find a way to show them that I could succeed on my own, without their help, without their favoritism. It started with small things, little clues that hinted at something bigger. I knew I wasn't going to get any support from my parents, but I couldn't shake the thought that they'd been hiding something from me. If they could give Sarah everything she wanted, surely they had more resources than they were letting on. I began paying closer attention, reading between the lines in their conversations, and picking up on the things they casually mentioned but never discussed openly. The first real breakthrough came when I happened to overhear my dad talking to my mom one evening. They were discussing something about the house, a house that they had been planning to give to Sarah. It was supposed to be a gift for her future, but the way they talked about it, I knew it wasn't just a simple family gesture. It was part of a larger plan, one where Sarah had all the advantages, and I had nothing. I pretended not to hear, but inside I was seething. My mind raced. There was something off about all of this. They had been so casual about everything, about Sarah getting all the money, all the property, and me getting left behind. And then it hit me. If they were willing to go this far for Sarah, they might have been hiding things from me for a long time. So, I began my investigation. I started looking into their finances, trying to figure out exactly how much they were worth, what assets they held, and how much they had actually given Sarah. It wasn't easy. My parents were private people, and they were careful about what they shared. But I was determined. I had spent years being overlooked, and now it was time for me to take control. I went through their old tax returns, quietly dug into bank statements, and even started keeping track of the businesses they were involved in. It wasn't just about the money, it was about uncovering the truth. I needed to understand just how much of my future had been stolen from me. And when I finally pieced everything together, I saw it clearly. They weren't just financially supporting Sarah. They were making sure that I would never have a chance to catch up. They had buried me in debt, kept me from getting a fair shot, and had given her everything to ensure she would never fail. The most infuriating part? They had done it all behind my back. They never trusted me enough to share the details, to give me the information I needed to make my own choices. But now, I had everything I needed. I knew what they had done, and more importantly, I knew how to make it right. I didn't act immediately. I wanted to wait, to be sure I had everything lined up. I knew that my parents wouldn't take kindly to me knowing about their secrets, but I didn't care anymore. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that they had made a grave mistake. They thought they could control everything, keep me down while elevating Sarah, but they hadn't counted on one thing: me. It wasn't just about getting back at them. It was about proving to myself that I could make it on my own. They had underestimated me for too long, and now it was time to show them that I was capable of more than they ever gave me credit for. I wasn't going to take their money or their pity. I was going to build my own empire, and they were going to watch it happen. As I started putting my plan into motion, I could see it all playing out in my head. I knew the risks, but I also knew that I had nothing to lose anymore. They had already abandoned me, so why not take the opportunity to make something of myself? And so, the pieces were in place. I just needed to wait for the right moment to strike. The day I had been waiting for finally arrived. It all came down to one perfect moment, a carefully orchestrated scenario where everything would unfold. I had spent months preparing, gathering evidence, building my own financial foundation, and watching my parents closely. I knew their weaknesses, their blind spots, and I had a plan that would expose their favoritism and destroy the illusion they had built around Sarah. It all started with a seemingly innocent family gathering. They'd invited me over for dinner, and Sarah, of course, was there too. I had no intention of confronting them directly at the table, but I knew that this was my opportunity to set everything into motion. I had planted the seeds over the last few weeks. Small comments, subtle hints, just enough to get them thinking that something was off. But now it was time to hit them where it would hurt the most. The dinner was awkward, as it always was. Sarah was glowing as usual, bragging about the latest vacation my parents had sent her on, showing off her new car, and casually mentioning how they had arranged everything for her future. Meanwhile, I was quiet, biding my time, my thoughts racing. Every word out of her mouth felt like a punch, but I held it together. I knew what I had to do. When the conversation turned to the subject of property, my heart started pounding. My parents mentioned that they had already bought Sarah a house in the city, an extravagant gift, something far beyond anything I could ever afford. But this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. I asked casually, "So, what about me? Any plans for my future?" The room went silent. My parents exchanged a quick glance, and I could see the discomfort in their eyes. They were caught off guard, but they tried to cover it up. My mom quickly said, "Oh, you're doing fine, sweetheart. You've always been independent. We figured you didn't need the extra help." I smiled, a cold, calculated smile. Right. Independent, I let the word hang in the air. Just like how I've always been expected to handle things on my own while Sarah gets everything handed to her. The tension in the room thickened. Sarah's face flushed and she opened her mouth to defend herself, but I wasn't done yet. I stood up, took a deep breath, and then I did something I had been planning for months. I pulled out the financial documents I had gathered, the bank statements, the tax returns, the investments. I spread them out on the table for everyone to see. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is how much you've given Sarah over the years, the trust funds, the gifts, the houses, the cars, and this," I pointed to the pile of papers in front of me, "is how much I've had to do on my own. You've set up a life for her, one where she never has to worry about anything, while you left me to struggle. I guess that's your idea of independent, right?" There was a moment of stunned silence. My parents were speechless, and Sarah's expression was a mix of confusion and defensiveness. But I wasn't going to stop. I could see the realization dawning on my parents' faces. They hadn't expected me to know this much, to have dug so deep. They thought they could control everything, that they could push me aside without facing any consequences. "Do you know what hurts the most?" I continued, my voice rising. "It's not the money. It's not the gifts. It's that you didn't think I was worth fighting for. You didn't believe in me, and now you're going to have to face the truth." My dad tried to speak, but I cut him off. "No, it's too late for apologies. You made your choice, and I've made mine." And with that, I walked out of the house, leaving them to sit in the mess they had created. The look on their faces was priceless. My dad's eyes were wide with shock, my mom's face was pale, and Sarah's jaw dropped. They hadn't seen this coming. They thought they could play the game forever. But now the tables had turned. As I drove away, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. I had done it. I had exposed them for what they truly were. People who thought they could control my life, keep me in the dark while they handed everything to Sarah. But I wasn't the naive child they had once known. I was in control now. In the days following that dinner, everything changed. My parents tried to reach out, but I didn't take their calls. I wasn't interested in their apologies or explanations. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no going back for them. For once, I was the one in control, and I wasn't about to let them regain the upper hand. Sarah, on the other hand, tried to play the victim. She called me repeatedly, texted me, and even showed up at my place a few times, claiming that I had humiliated her and accusing me of ruining the family. But it wasn't about her. It never had been. It was about my parents' betrayal and about taking back the future they had stolen from me. But it wasn't just about them. I wasn't going to let their favoritism define my success anymore. I had been building something on my own, quietly and steadily. I invested my time, my energy, and every ounce of determination into my work. And it paid off. In a matter of months, I had surpassed what I could have ever achieved with my parents' help. I launched my own company, and it took off faster than I ever anticipated. The work I was doing felt like a true reflection of my capabilities, and the satisfaction of achieving something without relying on anyone else was indescribable. Meanwhile, my parents' world started to crumble. The business ventures they had once relied on fell into disarray, and the money they had invested in Sarah's future slowly evaporated. The lavish lifestyle they had built around her started to collapse under the weight of poor decisions and reckless spending. Their attempts to salvage what was left were futile. And then came the final blow. One afternoon, my mom called me, her voice trembling, as if she had finally realized the enormity of the mistake they had made. She said they needed help. Their financial situation was dire, and they didn't know where to turn. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. But that quickly faded. The same parents who had never once considered helping me, who had seen me as nothing more than a disappointment, were now asking for my assistance. They had no idea how much pride I had swallowed in order to get to where I was. They thought they could make me feel small, make me beg for their support. But now the tables had turned. I didn't respond immediately. I sat there considering my options. But in the end, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to give them a handout like they had always done for Sarah. I wasn't going to let them off easy. Instead, I offered them one piece of advice. Figure it out yourself. I've worked hard to get where I am, and it's time you do the same. You can't keep relying on others to fix your mistakes. The call ended with my mom sobbing, but I felt nothing. The years of neglect, the years of being overlooked, the years of being treated like I wasn't enough, they had all led to this moment. I wasn't the one who had failed them. They had failed me, and now they would face the consequences of their actions. As for Sarah, she eventually stopped reaching out. The reality of the situation sank in. She was no longer the golden child. The house, the car, the trust fund, they had all turned into liabilities, and the life she had been handed so effortlessly started to unravel. There was no more money to bail her out, no more support, just a harsh reality that she had to confront on her own. As for me, life went on. I continued to build my business, grow my wealth, and live on my own terms. I was finally free from the chains of their favoritism. I was no longer defined by their expectations, their choices, or their neglect. I had become someone they could never control. And that was the greatest victory of all. Years later, I received a letter from my parents. They had lost their home, their investments, and their reputation. They asked if I could help them out, just a little to get back on their feet. But by that point, I had no interest in looking back. The damage was done, and they had shown me who they truly were. I never replied to that letter. Instead, I focused on what I had built, on my success, my freedom, and the life I had created without them. And I realized something that gave me peace. I wasn't the one who lost everything. They were.